Imagine living in a world where cities breathe with the rhythm of nature, where energy flows abundantly, powering the lives of our dreams without leaving a carbon footprint. Imagine living in a world where our cities are not concrete jungles, but living, breathing tapestries of green, natural, sustainable innovation. Imagine living in a world where technology serves both man and nature equally, enhancing the well-being of both humanity and Mother Earth. Imagine living in a world where every single human being's basic needs are met, in which the struggle for self-survival has ceased, allowing every individual equal opportunity to self-actualize. Imagine living in a world where every child grows up knowing they're a vital and integral part of a vast, beautiful, abundant, and alive world. Imagine living in a world founded upon cooperation and shared purpose, where each individual is honored, revered, and empowered to discover and cultivate the unique gifts they have to offer. Imagine living in a world where education nurtures every individual's unique curiosities, interests, and aptitudes, preparing people not just for jobs or careers, but for serving life. Imagine living in a world where work is a joyful expression of our unique self and innate creativity, not just something we do to get by or to just pay the bills. Imagine living in a world in which businesses exploiting people and resources for profit has become alien, where success of an organization is defined by its contribution to the well-being of all. Imagine living in a world where the most looked up to people are the most wise, rather than those with the most fame or the most material wealth. Imagine living in a world where political borders have faded, with communities no longer defining themselves by their nationality, but by mutual respect, collective responsibility, and their inherent oneness with all. Imagine living in a world where governance is a collaborative process and an ongoing dialogue, a living, breathing network of engaged citizens that allows the wisdom of all perspectives to be honored. Imagine living in a world where honesty and transparency is the norm, with every governmental action and expenditure visible to all, fostering trust and accountability. Imagine living in a world where every sunrise is a reminder of the intrinsic beauty and goodness that life is, and where every sunset is a celebration of another day lived in love. Imagine living in this world. This is the Solarpunk Vision. This is the collective vision we need if we are to ever move beyond the limiting, divisive ways of human selfishness, greed, and egotism. This is the collective vision we need if we are to not only survive the challenges our species faces, but to thrive in harmony with the planet. This vision can serve as our North Star as we navigate the increasing complexity of our world, inspiring us to reimagine our relationship with ourselves, with others, and to our sacred planets. And as you watch this further, you will see that this Solarpunk vision is not just a dream, but it's a call to action, to listen to the calling of your heart, to acknowledge, honor, and revere the truth of your soul, and to never ever abandon the greatest, grandest, most high vision you've ever had about what humanity is capable of if we simply work together, cooperate, and love one another. Now, the Solarpunk aesthetic is not something that I came up with. Of course, I put my own spin on it, but it's a movement that has been growing in popularity in recent years, and the essence of Solarpunk is this vision of a radically optimistic future in which humans, nature, and advanced technology harmoniously weave together to give rise to a utopian, yet of course not perfect, society in which mankind flourishes on a level never before seen in history. This Solarpunk aesthetic was created in stark contrast to other punk aesthetics such as cyberpunk, which typically imagines a dystopian future of human technological fusion, mega corporations replacing government, social unrest with rampant crime and wide wealth gaps, as well as urban decay with highly overpopulated and highly polluted cities. Obviously, cyberpunk is the future aesthetic that we do not want. Anyone can know that, but of course something like Solarpunk sounds much more happy and much more peaceful and hopeful. But if you take a deeper look into this cyberpunk aesthetic, you'll find that much regarding the cyberpunk outlook echoes the current state and consciousness of humanity, with the cyberpunk vision essentially being one of unchecked capitalism, uncontrollable technological advancement, along with the egoic thirst of power, influence, and control run amok. In the cyberpunk world, all aspects of life are commodified. Profit and material gain is always prioritized over social and environmental concerns, and the society for the most part operates under an every man for himself mentality. With technological advancements being excessively relied upon to solve complex human issues, and in the cyberpunk vision, there's also just little belief in the possibility of positive change, and there's virtually no power or say to the common people in this vision. And as you might be able to intuit already, this cyberpunk vision is not terribly far off from our present day reality in many ways. Of course, we don't have cyborgs fighting in the streets, or we don't have flying cars zipping past neon lit skyscrapers, at least not yet. But we do see glimpses of a cyberpunk reality through large corporations wielding immense power, increasing wealth inequality, pervasive digital surveillance, environmental destruction, and the shockingly, might I even say scarily, quick rate at which technology and AI are progressing. And don't worry, we will get back to Solarpunk in a second. I'm not going to talk about cyberpunk forever, but I say this to make the point that all of this, everything beautiful and everything ugly about our world, is a direct reflection of ourselves. If we go on to create some sort of cyberpunk reality, that's our fault. Or if we go on to create some beautiful solarpunk reality, then we were the cause of that. So what I'm saying is that the power is in our hands. And as 2025 rounds the corner and we enter into the second quarter of the 21st century, I am left with the feeling that we are at a crossroads, that how we collectively act in the next 25 to 50 years will be the most significant and defining time period of Homo sapiens history thus far. And as uncertain and as bleak as the future may seem, each and every single one of us plays a unique role in the unfolding of the human story. Every thought we have, every word we speak, and every action we take has a ripple effect into the collective, shaping the world both in the physical and mental planes of existence. So my intention in creating this video is to empower you through planting the seeds of the Solarpunk vision into your mind. I think it's a very beautiful vision. I feel very deeply inspired by it, and I share it with you with the intention that you can more consciously, intentionally, and lovingly craft your own future so that you and every being you encounter in your life can experience the gifts that you have to offer. And so, of course, as the creator of this video, I'm putting my own spin onto the Solarpunk vision. I don't think what I have to talk about will deviate very far at all from what other people have to say about Solarpunk, but I'll be bringing in new perspectives into the Solarpunk discussion that I have not yet heard talked about in Solarpunk circles so far. And this is all as a means to enrich in the vision and inspire you all the more to ultimately be the change that you wish to seek in the world. Remember, the power is in your hands. All right, let's proceed. Let's talk about why having a hopeful vision for the future is so extremely important. So the way I see it is that the vision we have about the future, or the lack of one, you might not have one, well, that plays a huge role in how we relate to life. The vision we have for the future formulates most all of our thoughts, opinions, behaviors, actions, and motivations. For example, if the future is something that is primarily viewed as fearful and frightening, then our orientation towards life will likely be defensive and self-protective so as to alleviate said fear. And on the other hand, if the future is primarily viewed as happy, hopeful, and with immense possibility for betterment, then our orientation towards life will likely be expansive, open, creative, and work towards with a sense of purpose and meaning. And while it is completely valid to be fearful of the future, I certainly am in many respects, we're all human, we all have fear, it's important to be aware of how this fear manifests in our experience in thought, word, and action. Does this fear cause you to back down from challenges, to cling to your comfort zone, to retreat to what is familiar? Does this fear cause you to distrust others? Does it cause you to view humanity as inherently evil? Does this fear cause you to value short-term security over long-term flourishing? And really, ultimately, does this fear close you down from actualizing the life of your highest excitement? These are all questions to hold within your mind and to contemplate, but what fear really ultimately does is to keep us in a box. It constricts us to the confines of who we believe we are and what we are capable of. And what I am advocating for is for you to feel into the depths of your heart, the deepest caverns of your soul, and imagine the greatest, grandest, most high vision you could possibly have about yourself and about the world. And this is not to be some grandiose vision to satisfy your hungry ego. This is a soulful vision, and a soulful vision is created from the part of you that knows you are whole and complete, that lacks nothing, that needs nothing, and really just desires nothing but peace and happiness for all beings. And of course, it will take time for this vision to materialize in your consciousness in a way that is unique to you. You'll likely have to do a lot of contemplation, a lot of inner work, have a lot of insights and life experience, and you also probably have to suffer quite a bit in order to really get the vision clear and in a unique way to you. And Of course, it'll be wise to add to this vision and to alter it very often, but once you have a solid vision, what I'm advocating for is that you never, ever abandon this vision, because if you're not seeking to create the highest, most exciting, most beautiful, most loving reality that you can, then what are you even doing? If you're living for any future other than the one that lights you up the most, you are settling, you are complacent, you are living in fear, you're locked in survival mentality, and you're simply just not aware of how great things can be. You have no idea what your potential is. You simply are not fully living if this is the case for you. And in this, it doesn't mean that fear is repressed or avoided, but rather fear is just honored as a natural part of the human experience. It's seen as the part of us that protects us. And if we have the courage to be curious about our fear rather than being a slave by blindly reacting to it, we'll probably find that much of our fear is misguided. It's unnecessary, seeing that their underlying causes are often rooted in past experience that don't have much bearing in the present moment. It could be just as simple as limiting belief or just simple misunderstandings about ourselves and the world we inhabit. And while shining the light of awareness on our fear, it doesn't make our fear disappear overnight. It does change our relationship to our fear, which allows us to see fear as valuable information that points us towards our growth edges, inviting us into a more open, a more greater, a more expansive version of who we believe we are and what we are capable of. So you can use fear as a means of self-study in order to gain the knowledge necessary to expand into the highest version of you that can realize this vision. And remember, never ever abandon the vision. I'm going to keep saying that over and over again. Never ever abandon the vision. You may change it, you may alter it, but you must never abandon the greatest, grandest vision you ever had about who we are and what we are capable of. Because quite literally, the future state of the world depends on how deeply you can stay anchored in your truth. So what I found for myself as I contemplated my ideal vision for the future of humanity was that it strongly resembled this solarpunk aesthetic that has been growing in popularity over the last few years. And so here I am, planting the seeds of the vision in your mind. And we have pictures on the screen here. Isn't it so beautiful? Does it not fill your heart with joy thinking about living in this world? And common critiques of utopian visions, such as Solarpunk, say that these visions are so outlandish and so away from becoming a reality that they end up being nothing but a dream in our minds. But what this critique overlooks is that the current state of the world today is actually even more crazy and outlandish than anyone even a couple hundred years ago could have possibly imagined or dreamed of. And everything that humans have ever created has started with a vision, with an imprint in the mind. And using our creative intelligence, we then alchemized this mental image or this mental imprint into the physical plane of existence, allowing us to invent things like cars, airplanes, TVs, smartphones, the internet, entire big cities, entire metropolises, and artificial intelligence as well, which is on the come up. So all of this started with a vision. So likewise, if people can unite under this Solarpunk vision, it is going to gain more and more traction within the collective consciousness, which will increase its outer manifestation into the world. And this is where the concept of the infinite game comes in. And the infinite game, as I have often mentioned in prior videos, is a concept created by author James P. Carse and was further fleshed out by author Simon Sinek in his book, The Infinite Game. And to play the infinite game in our current world is a very courageous act. It's something that only a very small number of people embody. And to understand what the infinite game is, one must first understand what the finite game is. And the finite mindset is the manner in which the majority of humanity operates. To play a finite game is to live life within a boundary, a set of rules, a clearly defined beginning and endpoint, and with people who win and with people who lose. That is, they live life in order to win or to have more, whether it be money, material wealth, high status, or what have you. And to give examples, think of winning a sports game, working towards a job promotion, acquiring X amount of money, trying to get as many matches and dates as possible on dating apps, acquiring a mansion, etc. And now these things, they're not inherently bad to pursue. Don't think these things are bad. I'm not bashing or judging anyone. But what's bad is becoming entranced with this mindset of always being a winner, when your entire orientation towards life is about more, winning, all for self and not for other. And when an entire society is entranced with this mindset, a world of haves and have-nots is created, which is precisely the world that we have lived in for virtually the entirety of our species' existence, or at least for several hundred, a couple thousand years, and it's still the world that we live in today. Think of slavery, imperialism, the fact that the richest 1% own over 50% of the world's wealth, while the poorest 50% own less than 1% of the world's wealth. Also think of the fact that the average CEO makes over 800 times the average worker's pay, which is absolutely blasphemous to me. Many of these workers, they make a minimum wage, and the CEO is making hundreds of millions of dollars. So the finite game is precisely what the Solarpunk vision is not. And to properly and healthy hold the Solarpunk vision in your mind, you must become an infinite game player. And when you play the infinite game, you play not within a boundary, but towards the horizon, towards the endless possibility of whatever you can envision. And as I've touched upon already, you want to envision something so beautiful, great, grand, and high that literally tears might come to your eyes. Because be so idealistic in this vision that it could not possibly be fully actualized in your lifetime, but also be so moved by the vision that you are willing to work your entire life towards the cause. That's what it takes to be Solarpunk, and that's why it's the infinite game. It never ends. Be a world citizen in your vision, not a citizen of your community or your nation, because, well, that would be a boundary. Welcome and embrace everyone into your vision. Oppose nothing. And most important of all, seek to be an inhabitant of this future state. Don't just talk about this great grand Solarpunk vision. Actually embody the consciousness that a wise citizen in this future world would have. Because that's what it's really about at the end of the day. It's not so much about outwardly manifesting this Solarpunk vision into physical reality. Of course, that would be great, and that's what we want, that's what we're working towards, but it's really about spreading the wise, conscious, peaceful, harmonious, blissful, and loving energy that Solarpunk represents. And when you do this, you ripple your consciousness into the collective, and you inspire others to join in on your infinite game, increasing its power all the more. This is how you properly manifest. This is actually how you create the reality that you want to create. In the case of Solarpunk, to actually manifest Solarpunk into the physical world, you first have to be the person that would inhabit that future Solarpunk reality. You have to live in accordance to Solarpunk values. You have to embody the energy that a Solarpunk person would, which is probably very peaceful, very loving, it's very heartfelt, it's very present, it's very wise. It's that type of energy, and you should contemplate more what that energy is so you can better be it. And when you have the right being, naturally you're going to do the things that a Solarpunk human does. And as a result of that right doing, if we all collectively work together, the universe will then catch up and we will have the reality of Solarpunk. And in the case of bringing about full spectrum transformation to the world, which I know is a huge task, it will likely be far beyond our lifetimes before we have that Solarpunk reality in its totality. But again, what I'm emphasizing is that the being aspect of Solarpunk is really the only aspect that truly matters. Most people have this manifesting principle very, very, very backwards. They believe that once they have something, then they can finally do the things they truly want to do, which allows them to finally be the way they want to be, which is happy and fulfilled. I was caught in this trap for so long. I can't even tell you how long I was caught in this trap. I mean, many people are caught in this trap for their whole life. And sadly, it's this belief that one must have something in order to be happy, which is precisely what has created the world of haves and have-nots. It's what leads people to seek having more money, more status, more nice things, more power, more influence, more whatever it is, more sex. They want to have it, to possess it themselves. And in my case, I used to think that once I had a business that made a high enough income to sustain myself full time, I would be able to do things like travel, spend more time, learning about things that interest me, spend more time with friends, pursue romantic relationships again, etc. And then only after that could I finally be happy and fulfilled. That's what I believe. And this mindset absolutely wreaked havoc on my life in many ways other than just this business example alone. This tunnel-like vision on having a higher income with my business led to overworking myself to the point of burnout, which also led to a lot less energy and a lot less zest with my clients and the people in my life. It led to pretty severe insomnia. It led to the destruction or the dwindling of important relationships in my life. It also drastically increased my sense of loneliness and isolation. It just made And it just always like perpetuated this like looking outside of myself for happiness and for fulfillment. And as I was dealing with these symptoms, which were making life quite difficult and quite unenjoyable in many aspects, I was beginning to see how I just could not continue operating like this. I would have rather abandoned the business than continuing to operate in the way that I was. And as this was happening, the universe was sending me all the right messages, and luckily I listened. These were messages about trusting in the process, appearing everywhere. And I came upon the be, do, have paradigm, which I just described from Conversations with God, book 1. That's how I got this be, do, have principle. And I actually put it into practice. And from this, I decided I would try my best to let go of having the full-time business and instead trust that just being the way that I authentically wanted to be would lead me to the outcomes that were meant for me. And so I stopped trying so hard to control the results of my life and just trusted that the results would come just by living how I authentically desired to. And in doing this, I became far less serious and far less uptight. I became less laser focused on developing myself and building the business, and I just became more loving, more open, more accepting, and more trusting of the whole process. And since then, I started spending about 25 to 30 hours per week on the business instead of 50 to 60 like I was before. I've been hanging out with friends a lot more, and also I just returned from a 2-week road trip that I planned rather spontaneously. And immediately after returning from the road trip, I proceeded to have the most financially lucrative month of my life from the business, when I was not at all really expecting that to happen. So we can say that the having part of the manifestation was finally catching up to the more authentic being, which was really, really great to experience, but was also not at all the reason why I felt happier, lighter, and more fulfilled in recent months. It was because I just started being who I wanted to be, and that was enough. That was enough for me to just be happy, as being myself. So I use this example to emphasize that when it comes to working together to collectively manifest this solarpunk reality, being is the only aspect that truly matters. So seek to be an inhabitant of this future solarpunk state, even though it doesn't exist in physical reality yet, and apply this to anything in your life. Authentically be the person who has that thing, even if you don't quote unquote have it, and then it will naturally come to you. But to help you out here, to avoid fixating on having the solarpunk reality, it is important to hold solarpunk as a dialectical utopia in your mind. A dialectical utopian vision is one that is not perfect, it's not fixed, it's not an end-all be-all state, but it's a vision that is adaptive and dynamic, it's open, it's messy, and it's with plenty of room for revision based on the input of newly attained perspectives and arising challenges. Because the reality is that no future state will be without challenges. So if you construct the solarpunk vision as this future reality where everything is perfect and you're happy forever and you never suffer and we're all together and everything's perfect, then you're setting yourself up for disappointment and disillusionment. But by holding solarpunk as a dialectical utopian vision, you can find fulfillment in authentically being solarpunk rather than fixating on having this solarpunk reality. You can welcome new perspectives that enrich in the vision as you go about the journey, and you can just remain flexible and open and adaptive in the face of change. You aren't so rigid about having this exact perfect vision. That's what happens. And this is what it's like to be an infinite game player. We imagine the greatest, most grand, and most high reality that we can, but we don't fixate on having it. We simply be it, knowing that we may never actually see the vision fully come to fruition in our life, but that doesn't matter to us because that's not where we derive our happiness and fulfillment from. We derive our happiness and fulfillment from simply being ourselves authentically in each and every moment. So really, as you can probably tell now, this video is going to be all about how to be solarpunk. So one of the main reasons I felt compelled to create this humongous video that's over an hour long about solarpunk was because in my research of solarpunk, the calls to action were merely limited to what one can do to bring about the solarpunk reality. These were calls to action with things like practicing minimalism and reduce your individual carbon footprints, buying from small, locally owned businesses rather than large corporations, composting kitchen waste, learning to repair and upcycle items, starting your own garden, and using bicycles or public transportation whenever possible. Know that these points are all extremely, extremely, extremely important. Don't get me wrong, we need to be doing things like decentralized power from large corporations and centralized institutions. We need to be doing things that are ecologically conscious. Of course, I completely agree 100% with all these points. Do all of these things that the solarpunk advocates are advocating for, But what I noticed was that no one was talking about the real issue. And the reality is that the current state of the world is a consciousness issue. And remember what Albert Einstein once said? No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. Because the reason that the current state of the world is dominated by egocentric, ethnocentric, and religiocentric worldviews, has the richest 1% of the world hoarding nearly half of the world's wealth, has billions living in poverty, has millions dying each year from starvation, has several active wars, is altering the Earth's climate to dangerous levels, and is in the midst of a sixth mass extinction, with species disappearing at nearly 1,000 times faster than natural rates, well, that's all because the people of the world are too unconscious. If people were simply more conscious and thus cared more about each other, none of these atrocities would be happening. We are literally still in the dark ages in terms of human consciousness, and if we are ever to move beyond these times in hopes of bringing in a reality that more closely resembles Solarpunk, we have to take a major leap as a species in terms of our consciousness. This is going to require us to expand our circle of empathy beyond our immediate surroundings, beyond our family, beyond our friends, beyond our community, and beyond our nation, to one that encompasses all of humanity and the entire biosphere. This is world centrism. We will have to move from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, recognizing that there's more than enough resources for everyone to thrive if we distribute wisely and consciously. We'll have to shift deriving our happiness from having, consumerism and materialism, to deriving happiness from being, authentic relationships, inner growth, and positively influencing others. We'll have to evolve our economic systems to prioritize long-term collective well-being over short-term profit. We'll have to recognize and visually feel our fundamental interconnectedness and oneness with all of life. And we have to cultivate our emotional and our spiritual intelligence. We can't just limit intelligence to IQ, which is basically just logical mathematical intelligence. That's just one very narrow type of intelligence. We have to incorporate the emotional and the spiritual and other domains as well. And of course, there's many more points in this that I'm not speaking of. So how do we collectively make this leap? Well, to even begin talking about how we can make the leap into a collective consciousness that can bring forth the Solarpunk reality seems like an impossible task, but luckily, brilliant thinkers and researchers from the past have gifted us invaluable frameworks that allow us to think about human consciousness development in a much easier to understand way. Perhaps one of the most useful frameworks that can be brought into this discussion is integral theory, created by the philosopher Ken Wilber. And basically, integral theory is a comprehensive framework that attempts to synthesize the very best of pre-modern, modern, and postmodern thinking. It has often been described as a theory of everything. And there's many aspects to this theory, but more than just what I explained here. But when it comes to human development, integral theory synthesizes the research of numerous developmental psychologists to arrive at a coherent, full-spectrum framework of psychological development. Again, I won't dive too deeply into the specifics here, but you can look into books such as Spiral Dynamics, A Brief History of Everything, or Susan Cook-Reuter's research paper titled Ego Development Theory, a full-spectrum theory of vertical growth and meaning-making. And that research paper is available for free online. I can leave links to that in the description. And also, if you want to learn more, you could also just watch a previous video of mine titled Integral Theory, the 10 Stages of Conscious Development, if you just want a more introduction to the theory. But I'll explain a few relevant aspects of what the research shows here, because it's very important to what we're talking about here. And what the research on human development finds is that development does not stop at ages 18, 21, or 25. Of course, physical aspects of the body stop developing at around that age, but domains of existence such as the psychological, the emotional, and the spiritual are all areas you can continue to develop in for your whole life, and your overall experience of existing can become unfathomably more blissful, more whole, and more complete as a result. And so to summarize this in an as efficient way as I possibly can, there's so much more complexity to this obviously, but I interpret the human consciousness developmental process as a gradual process of opening and expansion of one's identity. That is, expanding and opening oneself to a consciousness of higher and higher wholes of reality. In this context, a whole represents an aspect of reality that is both a whole in and of itself, but it's also a part of something else larger. In philosophical terms, this is called a holon. But to use an example of human development, a baby begins their life identified solely with their own reactionary impulses and desires. Their entire reality revolves around the concept of me, which is a whole in and of itself, but as they grow, they realize that they are part of a family, and thus they expand their identity to include their family unit. The family unit represents a higher whole, but as the individual gets even older, their expansion of identity continues to incorporate new wholes, such as their local community. Perhaps this could be their school or their religious group, but then eventually their identity can expand to include even higher wholes, such as their entire nation, and eventually the whole world, or perhaps even the entire cosmos, if the individual evolves their consciousness to a very high level. And know that the process of this expansion, it isn't merely intellectual. It doesn't just occur completely in the mind. It's not just about the way you think, or it's not just a perspective. It includes that, but of course the process of the expansion includes a deeply felt sense, a viscerally lived experience that fundamentally alters how one perceives self, other, and world, and changes how they operate within it. You literally see the world through a different lens. You see yourself through a different lens, a more expanded lens. You literally become a different person as this process goes about. And for a person that identifies with all of humanity and deeply embodies a world-centric consciousness, well, every action they take is with concern for all people. These types of people see themselves first and foremost as global citizens, rather than primarily constructing their identity based on their religion, their ethnic group, or their nationality. These types of people are more likely to make lifestyle choices that minimize harm to the environment. They tend to view their career more like a life purpose, viewing work in terms of how they can contribute to collective well-being, as opposed to how much material wealth or how much success they can have. They are more open-minded and less ideological and dogmatic. They tend to view time on a larger scale, taking into consideration long-term effects of individual and collective action, as opposed to what can be gained in the short term. And they also have a greater capacity for multi-perspectivalism. They're able to approach any issue with nuance and not fall into this trap of very dualistic, very egoic, black and white thinking. These are just a few qualities of the world-centric human. Feel free to add to the list in the comments, but the thing is, the vast majority of humanity does not operate with any world-centric consciousness. It's actually estimated by various researchers that only about 15 to 20% of the world embodies this level of consciousness. And of course, anybody within this 15 to 20% probably has leakages. They probably could deepen the embodiment of this world-centrism as well. And of course, any human on the entire planet will tell you that what they are doing, what they believe in, is what's best for the entire world. It's not that they can't think in terms of the whole world, but in reality, the vast majority of people act in a way that does not consider the well-being of the entire planet, but only themselves, their family, their religious group, and their nation. And so the vast majority of humans operate at what developmental psychologists call the ethnocentric and nation-centric levels of development. Now, this is not inherently negative. Know that I'm not casting judgment or bashing any human or group of humans based on their level of consciousness. For the most part, one's consciousness is determined by their geographical location of origin and the culture in which they were raised. It is out of one's control in a large part, but what's important to know is that each and every level of development has been crucial for human survival based on the given needs and issues of that society at that time, with levels that incorporate greater wholes emerging to solve problems which previous levels could not. So, to give a historical example, at the onset of the founding of the United States, the nation had leaped into a budding nation-centric consciousness. I would even argue a budding world-centric consciousness as well, with their triumph over monarchy and transition into democracy. But of course, this nation was still operating with extremely strong ethnocentric undercurrents, given the nation's legalization of slavery, and nearly a century after the nation's founding, a dispute primarily over the moral issue of slavery began between the northern and southern states of the country, starting a civil war. And to grossly generalize these two sides, we can say in developmental terms that the North, who was advocating for the abolition of slavery, was operating from a primarily nation-centric mode of consciousness. And like I said, I'd also argue a budding world-centric consciousness as well. On the other hand, the South, who was rejecting the expansion of this consciousness, clinging to the racist ideals to desiring the continuation of slavery, was operating from a primarily ethnocentric mode of consciousness. And with the North winding up victorious in the war, slavery was effectively abolished nationwide. And this was a great sign of growth. The United States took a major leap in their halving of a more nation-centric and world-centric state. And this was only possible because more and more people in the country were first being from a more conscious place. Of course, the United States continued to operate with very strong ethnocentric undercurrents for many years to come, with blacks and minorities continuing to be heavily oppressed following the Civil War. But The United States was able to continue the expansion of its consciousness through continued thought and action, calling forth a series of civil rights and social justice movements that brought about greater equality among all people within the nation. Of course, the United States continues to operate with very significant ethnocentric undercurrents. I think we're seeing that more and more today, but still, looking back, the level of consciousness of the average American citizen today is noticeably higher than 150, 100, and even 50 years ago. I mean, even the most conservative individuals today typically don't want to go back to slavery, and that's very huge progress. So allow this to be an example of a higher consciousness solving a problem in which a lower consciousness could not. This was the problem of racism, and it's very, 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 very far from being fully solved, by the way. Very, very far. But my point is that you cannot solve racism with ethnocentric consciousness. This is because ethnocentric consciousness is inherently racist, creating a division based on ethnicity. So to solve racism, you have to take a leap to a higher whole of reality in your consciousness, that of nation-centrism and that of world-centrism. But now, as we round the corner into 2025, we face a new, complex set of serious issues as a species that are fundamentally global in nature. For one, the world's leading scientists tell us that if we do not find a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and embody more sustainable, more ecologically conscious ways of living, we face catastrophic environmental consequences that will affect every corner of the planet. We also are heading towards a technological singularity if the development of artificial intelligence continues at projected levels, and we have no clue what's going to happen then. In addition, global wealth inequality is increasing. Billions live in poverty and millions die each year of starvation. Racism is still rampant. Shit's going down, and there's also numerous other issues that I'm not speaking of. And so, while humanity's problems have become increasingly global, worldwide, in nature, less than 20% of the world operates within this world-centric consciousness that is needed to solve these problems. That means that the open, flexible, expansive, systems-aware, very empathetic, globally conscious ways of being that characterizes this world-centric consciousness is not something that the vast majority of humanity is capable of. This is very scary, and given the current status of our world, it's now more important than ever to self-declare as a steward of this earth and take it upon yourself to raise your consciousness, to become a more loving human, and to discover and align with your life purpose, with the calling of your heart. And know that I'm not trying to make you feel guilty or shameful in any way if you aren't doing this. I'm not trying to elicit some sense of fear in you that makes you slave away for your entire life trying to solve global issues. Life is meant to be a beautiful, enjoyable, fun experience, and the worst thing you could do is let fear control you. All I'm advocating for here is that you take a deeper look at yourself and at the world, you work on healing your traumas, you work on transcending limiting beliefs, you develop a connection to something beyond yourself, you explore what makes you feel excited, and you follow, nourish, and cultivate that sense of excitement in a way that other people can benefit from. A life purpose. This process, which really is the process of self-actualization, is meant to be beautiful, expansive, eye-opening, and fun, at least most of the time. Of course, there's going to be hardship along the way as we face our shadow and all of that, but the vision of Solarpunk is a vision of the future in which humanity has collectively made a leap in consciousness and has effectively solved the issues of racism, nationalism, wealth inequality, climate change, AI, and more. This vision is meant to inspire you. It serves as a signpost of who we are and what we are capable of when we are at our best as a species. So if you resonate with the vision, which you probably do to a strong degree if you're still watching this, I remind you once again to never, ever abandon the vision. The worst thing you could do is let fear take its control over your entire life, binding you to a reality that is smaller, constrictive, and more contracted than what it can be. And as we progress in this video, we will discuss the role of fear, specifically analyzing what will need to be let go of in order to let in the Solarpunk reality. And so now is the time where we can discuss a little bit more about the specifics of the Solarpunk vision, specifically what I see the governmental and economic structure being. And I've neglected to talk about this aspect of Solarpunk so far because so many people carry closely to their hearts deep-seated beliefs about what the ideal system ought to be and come readily equipped in any debate to rationalize away anything that does not fit their beliefs. But now that I've explained a central part of my philosophy, I feel comfortable that those still watching are open to what has to be said about what needs to be let go of in order to let in Solarpunk. And the way that Solarpunk sees it is that an enormous aspect that needs to be let go of in order to have this reality in its totality is capitalism. Capitalism and solarpunk do not go hand in hand. The reason that capitalism and solarpunk do not go hand in hand is because capitalism's competitive nature contradicts solarpunk's emphasis on cooperation and community. Capitalist markets also often promote short-term, finite thinking, which conflicts solarpunk's necessary long-term thinking, infinite thinking, the infinite game. Capitalism also inherently creates a wide wealth gap, which contradicts solarpunk's vision of a more equal and equitable world. Capitalism also creates a wide wealth gap, so much to the point that many people live in poverty, which contradicts solarpunk's vision of a more equal and equitable world. In addition, the metrics of success in capitalism, such as GDP, profit, etc., does not align with solarpunk's metrics of success, which are things like happiness, health, collective well-being, consciousness. Capitalism also has a tendency to alienate the majority of workers from the fruits of their labor, while solarpunk holds the ideal of citizens engaging in work that is uniquely meaningful to the individual, that bears fruit to themselves and the world around them. And most of all, capitalism just breeds an overall individualistic ethos, which is at odds with solarpunk's emphasis on collectively shared responsibility and fate. So, as you might be able to intuit, solarpunk is a culture that is significantly more collectively oriented, but of course it still has the individual freedoms we love and cherish today. And so the way I see it is that the overall economic structure of solarpunk will likely be some sort of blend of socialism, communism, even anarchism. And when talking about moving away from capitalism and hearing the words socialism, communism, half the world will cower in fear. They'll demonize the individual who dared to utter those words, and then they'll rationalize away why it's impossible to have a harmonious society that operates in that fashion. And the most common argument used in why a capitalist world is the best and why a different mode of operation is impossible is the human nature argument. The human nature argument essentially posits that humans are inherently selfish, competitive, and even greedy, and thus are driven by what can benefit them personally. I personally believe that this argument largely stems from Christianity's belief that humans are innately sinners, which I do not believe in, but I won't make a religious argument here. But anyway, this argument is used to justify why humans have historically organized themselves into top-down hierarchies and why attempts at more egalitarian societies have failed in the past, which leads proponents of the human nature argument to claiming that capitalism is the system that works best because it is the only system that effectively harnesses humanity's innate traits in a way that can benefit society. However, the human nature argument blasphemously overlooks a lot about human nature. First and foremost, the argument assumes that humans have a fixed nature, when in reality there's no such thing as a fixed nature. If there was such a thing as a fixed nature, there would be no such thing as evolution, which quite literally is the process of life transmorphing over time into a form of greater complexity and intelligence, a different nature, we can say. So the main reason I explained integral theory and the stages of conscious development from egocentric to ethnocentric to nation-centric to world-centric was to make the point that human thought tendencies, belief patterns, ego structures, motivations, and thus behavior can change drastically based on the level of consciousness the individual is operating from. And the change can be so drastic that one can literally be said to have a different nature. So it's in the nature of someone who's operating from a primarily world-centric consciousness to think and behave in a way that serves not just themselves, but all people. On the other hand, it's in the nature of someone who's operating from an egocentric, ethnocentric, religiocentric, or nation-centric consciousness to compete with others and prioritize the needs of their own in-group at the expense of others. And it is precisely from these very stages of consciousness that capitalism as we know it was born from. Capitalism as we know it today is a reflection of the current level of consciousness of humanity, which put into integral terms is roughly stage orange. And I know the color-coded language might not make much sense to you if you're not familiar with the theory, and I'm not going to explain like all the stages and all the colors here. There's plenty of other content about that. But what an individual at stage orange, which is our current level, collectively, of course there's many differences, but center of gravity. What an individual at stage orange will tend to do is see life as an opportunity for personal advancement and achievement. They'll tend to view life as a game to win, equating success with wealth and status. They'll seek to maximize efficiency, productivity, and measurable results, which is an individual reflection of this term profit that we often hear. They will seek to control the natural world for human benefit, and they will prioritize individual rights, personal freedom, and often very free market principles. And while this consciousness has been absolutely essential for many beautiful things, such as the birth of democracy, the foundation of science, and the advancement of technology, its limitations have become increasingly made known, with a number of global issues coming to the forefront of the human condition. It was also from these similar stages of consciousness, and lower stages of course, that more idealist, Marxist, and communistic modes of operation were first attempted, with nations such as the Soviet Union operating under communism. I put that in quotes. Communism, it wasn't super communistic, at least how I see it in the Solarpunk. It's not going to be some authoritarian state where people have no rights. But anyways, nations such as the Soviet Union, they operated under communism for several decades. And it was precisely because the society was operating from still egocentric, ethnocentric, and nation-centric modes of consciousness that these attempts horribly and atrociously failed. To use the example of the Soviet Union, first of all, they were operating under a very power-hungry and ego-driven leader in Joseph Stalin, who was not at all utilizing the system to serve the collective good. And second of all, the nation was constantly in competition or at war with other countries, which prevented any real true solidarity or cooperation from taking place, leaving decision-making to be made in such a way that supported very narrow national interest and did not consider the broader impacts on the people, and it did not empower the people. And yeah, not to mention that the system in place in that nation vehemently suppressed individuality, as well as didn't allow for freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And the nation was so vested in making themselves more powerful that it did not allow others to be their authentic selves or even come close to discovering such a thing as authenticity. And just operating beneath all of this was a strong scarcity mindset, a scarcity of food, water, and shelter, a scarcity of love and belonging, and a scarcity of an opportunity to grow and to expand. And whenever operating from a sense of lack, competition for what is perceived to be lacking will inevitably begin taking place, leading to the same battle for resources and the same battle for power that has happened over and over and over again throughout history. Everything shitty always happens due to a sense of lack. That is just a sense of fear. And when there is a sense of lack, a human could only develop and grow so much. The stronger the sense of lack, the less a person and less a society can develop to their true capacity, because their aims will always be to alleviate what is perceived to be lacking, which closes down growth opportunities. And it just so happens that humans have been operating from a sense of lack for the vast majority of our species' existence. It makes sense that when one opens a history book and finds nothing but brutality, war, rape, slavery, and genocide, that they become a bit disillusioned, that they might come to believe that it is baked into human nature to be selfish, greedy, power-hungry, and competitive. This would very well lead them to believe that capitalism is the system that best harnesses these traits in a way that benefits society. But the reason these communistic worlds, such as the Soviet Union, failed is not because communism inherently defies human nature, nor is it because Karl Marx's ideals are inherently toxic. It's because we've never had a society with the level of consciousness and the level of maturity to make those ideals possible. Not even close. We haven't come close to having that level of consciousness to embody those ideals. So when the consciousness shifts, so does the nature. The reality is that our species' technological advancements have made it so that there are enough resources for everyone to live functional, happy, and potent lives. We just have to unite as a world and make it happen. Our level of consciousness has to catch up to match our level of technological advancement. So, to repeat again, in my eyes, a world that operates under some blend of socialist, communist, and anarchist ideals is what composes the Solarpunk reality. And the reason I believe this is possible is because I see the people that inhabit the Solarpunk vision as being conscious enough to mostly sustain themselves, and thus they don't need a strong centralized government to wield all this influence on them. There aren't going to be people who can exploit the system to make a ridiculous amount of money and hoard a bunch of wealth and wield immense power over other people. Sure, there's going to be a very small few who have a desire to do that, but due to the collective consciousness in the Solarpunk reality being higher than someone who would have such a desire, systems would be in place that would not allow such a thing to happen. In our current capitalist reality, systems are actually in place that do allow such things to happen. In fact, they're actually encouraged. You know, when I was brought up, and I'm sure you can relate to this too, as we're being raised in this culture, like what's ingrained into everyone is just to become rich and successful and have millions and billions of dollars and have a mansion and everything. That's how you know that such ways of being are encouraged in this society. What other people who talk about solarpunk describe is a framework of mostly decentralized, interconnected communities that come together and collaborate on larger issues, with the government being primarily local, with local units connected to larger networks for regional and global cooperation. You know, there may be a centralized government, but its top-down influence on the people is probably going to be very minimal, just because it's not going to be needed. Instead, the government will serve as a facilitator of collective cooperation and collaboration, and economically speaking, resources would be viewed not as privately, individually owned, but as common heritage, because there would be an abundance for everyone. And of course, you know, in this world, you know, basic needs such as food, water, shelter, and healthcare and education would be guaranteed to all people. You know, people's basic needs would be met, and this would allow them to pursue their passions, follow the life of their highest excitements, and discover the unique gifts that they have to offer life. I don't want to get too deep into the economic and governmental vision of solarpunk, or else this video will get far too long. Perhaps that's for a future video, or as a vision for you guys to flesh out further, or maybe speak a little bit more on in the comments. But yeah, I mean, feel free to pry at or pick at any specifics of the governmental or economic structure. But what I will say is that in the solarpunk world, you don't need to worry about any pervasive sense of lack consuming you or the society at large. Sure, there's going to be hardships and there's going to be challenges, but the unity that people share with one another will be experienced as something so powerful that backsliding into a mindset of scarcity in which people collectively turn against each other will not even be something that is considered. So if we can collectively cultivate a unity like this, everything will change. But it all starts with you. That's my main message. It all starts with you. It all starts with you doing the work and cultivating unity within yourself. So to summarize everything I just said in the last several minutes, change our nature and we change our world. You change your nature by raising your consciousness. You raise your consciousness by intaking new perspectives via books, podcasts, videos, films, and spoken communication, following your curiosities, following what makes you feel excited, getting out of your comfort zone, traveling to a foreign culture, hanging out with cool people that make you think differently, spending intentional time in nature, increasing your somatic awareness, feeling your emotions deeply, properly digesting your emotions, getting your needs met, asking yourself powerful questions and deeply contemplating them, self-inquiry, meditating, having mystical experiences, doing shadow work, going to therapy, hiring a life coach, self-reflective journaling, doing psychedelics in a safe and intentional container, practicing gratitude, actively listening to other people, developing critical thinking skills and challenging your assumptions, engaging in creative expression, whether it be art, music, writing, dance, etc., engaging in community service, forgiving others, understanding others, listening to others, practicing radical honesty with yourself and with other people, embracing and fully feeling your suffering, cultivating a connection to your intuition and inner wisdom, following your heart, and taking care of yourself. And probably many, many, many more that I'm not listing. Feel free to list more in the comment section. But this is what the work is all about. I intentionally held back from diving deep into the specifics of what this beautiful solarpunk vision would look like, because I did not want this video to become some mental masturbatory session where you just keep thinking, oh my God, solarpunk, it's so amazing. I want to live in this world so bad. Let's go. The rest of the vision is up to you to flesh out on your own time. I just wanted to plant the seeds of it into your mind as a means to inspire you. And as you can probably tell now, my message is about empowering you and motivating you to take responsibility for the well-being of all by becoming the most mature, loving, self-actualized version of yourself. Because the reality is that you are only one human, and there are 8 billion of us. 8 billion, if you really think about that, that's really, really insane. And as individuals, we cannot expect to save the world or even come close to it. To believe we could do such a thing would be highly ego-inflating, which is counterintuitive to the work, but what we can do is tend to our own garden, nurture the path of our own development, and by doing so, we create a ripple effect that touches the lives of those around us. And us humans, you know, we're unlike any other species on the planet in the sense that we have the capacity for conscious evolution. That is, we have the capacity to self-reflect on our own motivations and behaviors as well as those of others. We can introspect in our beliefs and on our assumptions, and we can make a conscious, intentional effort to change them. No other species on our planet can do this. This allows us to shape the course of our own personal growth journey, and thus the growth of the human family at large, in a way that no other species can. That is, we can rise above our own nature and not live life at the whims of mere biological drives and cultural indoctrination. These were times of the past, before we had access to virtually infinite knowledge at our fingertips. Now life can become a consciously created project. Now we can start identifying ourselves as evolutionaries. That is, individuals that are consciously participating in the evolution of the human species, and by extension, the evolution of planet Earth. As an evolutionary, you embrace the path of your own self-actualization. You commit to being fully yourself, knowing that as you do so, you create space for others to be the same. You stay anchored to the greatest, most grand vision you ever had about who we are and what we are capable of. You are an infinite game player, and you approach life with just this sense of curiosity and openness. You're always eager to learn and to adapt. You aren't so defensive and serious and uptight all the time. And you, above all, you strive to be the change that you wish to see in the world, rather than just preaching about it. And you also engage in a lifestyle that deepens the connection to yourself, to others, and to the world around you. By identifying as an evolutionary, you take it upon yourself to rise above mere biological drives and cultural indoctrination, to consciously create a reality for all of us that is far greater, more loving, peaceful, blissful, and harmonious than any reality humanity has seen so far in our history. And really, above all, this is about our individual and collective reunification with God, the one, source, the universe, whatever you want to call it, becoming one again with the love that we fundamentally are. And this path is not easy by any means. There will be numerous hardships that challenge us, that cause us to want to stay small, to stay less than who we truly are. And it takes an enormous amount of courage to dive deep into our shadow, face our traumas, and do all the healing work, and stay resilient enough to persist through violent, bleak, or even uncertain times. But if you always stay anchored in your truth and never abandon the greatest vision you've ever had about yourself and ourselves, you will persist, we will persist, and we will grow into a species more wise, more conscious, and more loving. And our descendants will live to see the day that Solarpunk becomes a reality. Remember, the power is in your hands. So the reason I brought developmental psychology into the picture was because I wanted to emphasize that Solarpunk represents a particular stage of development within the human story, specifically the highest stages of development that only a small percentage of people on Earth presently embody. As I've said, my hope with bringing a developmental perspective into the Solarpunk discussion was to help you realize what both you and we are capable of when we become our most mature versions, so that you would feel inspired and empowered to take your own growth and development into your own hands. But, and this is a very big but, there's also a trap that many experience among those who cling to these developmental perspectives, myself included. This is a subtle trap, but it is extremely important that you are aware of it, because your well-being depends on it. So to explain this, a friend of mine recently pointed out to me that baked into these developmental models is sort of like this grand narrative of progress and superiority, and I have to agree with him for the most part. With this grand narrative that these developmental models perpetuate, it's this kind of subliminal perpetuating that those who are at the higher stages of development are somehow more important, more valuable to a society than those at the lower stages. And this can lead to a number of problems, both in how we view ourselves and in how we view other people. In my experience, clinging to these models led to a very strong pressure within me to continue advancing and developing, which caused me to become extremely perfectionistic, making me feel shameful and inadequate whenever I would fall short of my ideal of what I perceived fully developed means, which I perceived as being some sort of like non-dual enlightened consciousness in which I would never suffer again and I'd always be at peace 24/7. This trap precisely is what caused me to desire building my business as fast as possible, because I believe that the financial freedom that would come from the business would allow me more time and energy to foster my deeper growth and deeper development. And that statement, which I just said, it might be true, it probably is, but that's not the point. What's meaningful here is the fact that this belief caused me to push and strive to reached the end, making me terribly unsatisfied with the present moment. I was never like okay with where I was at. I was always seeking to be elsewhere, and this just made me suffer a lot. And this just isn't the Solarpunk way. My friend, in the Solarpunk world, work is not done in a pushing and striving fashion. It is done with a sense of joy, in a state of flow, and in a manner that is natural to who you are. Just start being that. You don't have to wait. You don't need a permission slip. You don't need to get anywhere. You can just start being yourself now, serving life now, serving others now in a way that is natural to who you are. And what's funny about this pushing and striving mentality towards growth is that ironically and counterintuitively, it reinforces the very ego structures that genuine developmental growth seeks to transcend. Pushing and striving just makes things worse at a certain point. You gotta stop that if that resonates. Also, to talk about other traps, clinging to developmental perspectives too rigidly can also cause one to use their perceived developmental level as a source of pride or superiority. They can use their perceived high development as a means to spiritually bypass, to avoid dealing with uncomfortable emotions and challenges. See my prior video on spiritual ego if you want to hear more about that specific point. It can also cause one to judge and dismiss the perspective of others that are perceived to be at lower stages, and all of this just oversimplifies the richness of the journey to wholeness, to unity, to God. So to combat this, it is important not to adhere to any one perspective too rigidly and approach these developmental models with a bit of humility and a lot of openness. Recognizing that the map is not the territory, a model is just a model, and by no means completely describes reality in its totality. By no means is it absolute truth, because to use these developmental models for purposes other than understanding and compassion for other human beings runs counterintuitive to the aims of what the creators of these theories had in mind. And so when applying this trap to Solarpunk, don't construct some big grand identity out of being Solarpunk. Don't look down upon others because you think you're bigger, better, more developed, or more wise, simply because you adhere to the Solarpunk vision. And very importantly, don't project your Solarpunk ideals onto everyone else, thinking that they will just buy into the vision the same exact way that you did. Because the reality is that you resonate with Solarpunk because your level of consciousness is likely above the center of gravity of human society. Not everyone has the capacity for this type of open, inclusive, world-centric consciousness that you do, so don't expect them to. If you forcefully project your Solarpunk ideals onto other people, you wind up creating resistance and alienation rather than positive change, rather than unity, which can trigger defensiveness as people feel judged, criticized, or unheard. It leads them to resist your ideas more strongly. It creates an us versus them mentality, and it also just misrepresents Solarpunk and making it seem like this aggressive, dogmatic ideology rather than inspiring vision and signpost for the future. And also all of this, all those traps, it just reinforces your own sense of egoic superiority, which is really what we're trying to get away from in the Solarpunk world. All of this runs antithetical to the Solarpunk vision, which again, it represents a world in which everyone is welcome and embraced. So let everyone grow at their own pace. Let everyone be on their own journey. You aren't here to save the world. That's not what you're here to do. That's not why you incarnated as a human. And there's one final subtle nuance I would like to point towards that may help you steer clear of this trap of forcefully projecting these ideals onto other people. And this point relates to your self-identity, literally the labels that you ascribe to yourself. So I mentioned earlier that I saw the Solarpunk reality as being a blend of socialist, communist, and even some anarchist principles. But know that I personally do not identify with being a socialist or a communist or an anarchist, nor do I label myself as anti-capitalist just because I said that the Solarpunk reality is a post-capitalistic reality. So don't label me as being any of these things, because I do not label myself as them. I do not ascribe myself these labels because if I did, if I called myself socialist or communist or anarchist or anti-capitalist, I would be making the claim that those realities are what is best for all people. And I don't claim that to be true. I just claim that those governmental and economic states is naturally what comes about for a society that is really, truly united, who truly loves for and cares about one another. But I'm not saying that that's what's best for all people given their current state of where they're at right now. So if I did give myself the label of socialist or communist or anarchist, this would lead me to projecting those ideals onto everyone else, because I would be saying that reality is the best one, which again would be forceful and antithetical to the actual Solarpunk vision. So in hopes of bringing forth Solarpunk, all I am advocating for is that those who hear these words take a deeper look within themselves, a deeper look at the world. They take on the path of healing, the path of growth. They develop a connection to something higher than themselves, and they follow, cultivate, and nourish their natural sense of excitement and joy in a way that other people can benefit from. Nowhere am I advocating for an uprising or a revolution to end capitalism and bring forth solarpunk. As I hope you already understand from watching this, an uprising or a forceful revolution would never ever work in bringing about the actual solarpunk vision, because an uprising would do nothing but perpetuate an us versus them mentality, and also just force a huge shadow into the collective consciousness, as whoever gets uprised or rebelled against would be repressed. Yeah, so this is all just a level of consciousness that is below the solarpunk reality. The solarpunk reality is not going to come about through violent rebellion. So what do I label myself as, if not socialist, communist, anarchist, or capitalist? And to be honest, I don't really know. I'm not too fond of ascribing labels to myself, as I feel labels put me into a constricted box, but I feel the label of evolutionary as what would describe me best. I mean, I know that's not really like a label of an economic system, but as an evolutionary, I recognize that my role is not to push for any particular government or economic system, but rather to inspire others and facilitate the growth of consciousness, both my own as well as others, in a way that will naturally lead to more sustainable, inclusive, harmonious, and loving ways of creating ourselves and our societies. And as an evolutionary, I recognize that no governmental and economic system is inherently good or bad, but rather exists as a direct reflection of the consciousness of those who created it to meet the needs and the wants that those people collectively have. So when applied to our current capitalist reality, which is a reflection of a consciousness about integral stage orange, which I mentioned earlier, that puts a high value on individual achievement, material success, profit, science, rationality, democracy, and technological innovation, I reflect on what's best and what works about this reality, as well as what doesn't work, and I desire to help create a reality that transcends what limits us, while also including what works. I'm not trying to go to some completely different place in which the reality is like 100% different, and like saying this reality fucking sucks. This is the integral way. So solarpunk represents a reality that takes place in the far future, and there will certainly be numerous stages in between our current reality and that of solarpunk. And what I think will happen next is that more and more humans butt up against the limitations of this capitalistic stage and realize that material wealth and status does not bring about happiness, science and technology cannot solve all of our problems, and that our relentless pursuit of profit and growth is not only causing severe damage to our planet, but it's also damaging the social fabric of society by causing severe wealth inequality and an array of other issues. So collectively, this would usher in the next stage of consciousness, integral stage green, which represents a deepening of world-centric awareness, which is already gaining a very significant traction in the human collective. And as society becomes increasingly green, this will likely lead to political and economic changes, such as stronger environmental regulations, as well as increased policies to specifically address climate change, higher taxes for the ultra-rich, stricter regulations on corporate power and influence, greater emphasis on human rights and social justice, increased funding for education, healthcare, etc., and more inclusively focused policies to combat inequality and inequity when it comes to class, race, gender, and sexual orientation. These are just a very select few of changes that I think will happen. There's definitely a lot more, but as you can see, all of these changes represent a greater concern for the whole world, for all humans. And of course, green comes with its own limitations, which will have to be moved past, which will lead to the next stage, and then the next stage, and the next stage, until hopefully we arrive at a reality that resembles solarpunk. And I won't get too deep into all the different stages here. Again, it would be way too long, but what you should take away from this point in identifying as an evolutionary is that you're not solely identified with any one system or future outcome. In holding solarpunk as a dialectical, utopian vision, you recognize that the path towards creating this future is open and messy. It isn't linear or predetermined, and it will involve continuing to change, adapt, grow, and integrate in order to realize the vision. So with that being said, let's move forward together as evolutionaries. Let's play the infinite game together, and let's never abandon the greatest vision we've ever had about who we are and what we are capable of. This is the Solarpunk way. And before I wrap up here, I would also like to leave you with some more practical calls to action. Of course, don't let these practical calls to action distract you from the real work that needs to be done, which is your own growth, the own expansion of your consciousness, but anything that you do in an ecologically conscious, sustainable way that can help shift power away from large corporations and centralized institutions and put power into the hands of the common people is going to be very helpful for bringing about the Solarpunk Vision. These can include actions such as starting a community garden, participating in local government and community decision making, investing in renewable energy, supporting local businesses, using public transportation whenever possible, practicing minimalism and reducing your carbon footprint, practicing permaculture principles, etc., and many more as well. Feel free to always add more into the comments of what this vision can be. And there's actually one such community in the world, that probably more too, that embodies much of these principles, and that is Findhorn Eco Village, located in Scotland. This eco village houses a few hundred people and is described as a synthesis of some of the very best of current thinking on sustainable settlements. And I won't speak too much on the village here, but check out their website. The link will be in the description to get an idea of what Solarpunk put into action on a local level could look like. All right, guys, this about wraps up the video. And after speaking here, I just find myself extremely grateful and happy with what's been said. I've been planning this video for over a year actually, but I also recognize there's still so much more nuance and complexity to what composes the Solarpunk Vision as well. And that's where you guys come in. Once this is uploaded into video form on YouTube, I would like to invite everyone into discussion and collaboration on the Solarpunk Vision in the comment section. What more needs to be said? What did I get right? What did I get wrong? Could my shadow have been shown here and how I represent the Solarpunk Vision? Of course, I bring my own viewpoints and perspectives and biases and shadow into this, and I'm sure that is showing in some form. I don't at all claim for this to be like the perfect perspective. I don't claim to be perfectly embodying these principles either that have been discussed, but I try my best. And yeah, Solarpunk is a vision that everyone is invited into. So let's critique my version of this vision so we can expand it, making it even more great and beautiful than it already is. All right, guys, if you find yourself inspired with what's being said here and are looking for some guidance in consciously crafting the course of your growth, consider hiring me as your life coach. As an integrally informed coach, we will align your life with your highest values and aspirations. We will develop practices that support the growth and expansion of your consciousness. We will uncover and integrate blockages or shadow aspects that may be holding you back. We will explore potential ways to meaningfully contribute to collective growth, and really we'll just help you fall deeper in love with life, with this experience of being a human being. If this interests you, please click the link in the comment section to book the free discovery call, which is a 45-minute call to discuss you, your unique life situation, goals, aspirations, etc., in order to determine if we are a good fit to work in the long term together. I hope to see you guys soon, and as always, guys, have a great day and peace.